Hi, it's Jesse. Welcome to my channel. Happy Lunar New Year. Happy Chinese New Year. Ni hao, wo Jesse. Wan yi, yuan dan kai la. For all of you who celebrate Chinese New Year, all of you who celebrate the Lunar New Year, I want to say Happy New Year to you. Listen, I have something that is often given as a gift in the Lunar New Year. It's a pomelo fruit. Something special about this pomelo is I grew it on my tree. Yeah, that's right. I have a pomelo tree. I also have an Oro Blanco grapefruit tree. Now, normally the pomelos are much larger than this, but I had to grow my pomelos this year in a container, and I had to grow my Oro Blanco in a container because all the way back in February of 2021, we had a really bad, horrible freeze that killed off a lot of the citrus that I had. But for my plants like the pomelo, which are ultra cold sensitive, I had already potted them up. So I was able to save several varieties of my citrus trees, the ones that I already thought were sensitive, or the ones that just weren't established enough for me to put them out in the yard. So I was able to harvest some citrus this year. Now I lost some of my other citrus, but thankfully I was able to preserve a good number of citrus. So I have this harvest. What we're going to do in honor of the Chinese New Year, in honor of the Lunar New Year, we're going to go ahead and sample this pomelo tree, and we're going to sample this Oro Blanco. Let me just tell you, the pomelo, I'm not 100% certain if it was ripe because I was moving my container from indoors to outdoors and outdoors back to indoors because we had some freezes that happened here in the Houston area, and it fell off. It just plopped and fell off while I was moving it. So I'm not 100% sure if this was ripe. The Oro Blanco, however, seemed to be more ripe. The peel is a little bit softer, and it did not fall off. I picked it, but normally Oro Blancos ripen in December, early January, and pomelos ripen in February. So I'm pretty sure this was ripe, and this is ripe, or it might be slightly underripe. We will see. So welcome to my channel, the Healthy Urban Gardening Channel with me, Jesse. Please like, subscribe, share with a friend if you like this content, and let's get trying these grapefruit. So let's get started with these two beautiful fruit. This one is a pomelo, this one is the Oro Blanco, okay? And as I was saying, I think that this one is a little bit less ripe. It's really firm. This has a lot more give. I don't know if this means anything about the ripeness, but this is not there in that one. But let's get started. In honor of the Lunar New Year, we're going to go ahead and cut the pomelo first. And I have an uncle who once said, when you're cutting big things, you need to use a big knife. So let's separate that. That is the pomelo. And then let's go ahead and section this off. Okay. This is the Oro Blanco. Okay. So I'm going to hold them up to the camera a little bit. As you can see, this one is you can barely see it, but this Oro Blanco is a little softer. Okay, you heard it when it crunched through, when the knife crunched through. This one, the pomelo, is a little tougher. Even in the rind, you see that flexibility, the flexion in the rind, the sponginess. Here in the pomelo, the rind is a bit tougher. It doesn't have very much flexion. Oro Blanco's golden yellow, which is where it gets its name, or white gold. The pomelo, which is like a yellow, but it's starting to blush a bit in there, blush a little bit pinkish red, but for the most part it's a yellow. Giving them the sniff test, they both smell fabulous. I will say that the Oro Blanco's smell is slightly better. It smells slightly more aromatic, but both of these things you could definitely use them as air freshener, to perfume up your house, or whatever it is that you like to do. So let me go ahead and dig into the flesh using this grapefruit spoon. As you can see, let's just deal with the texture. The texture here is a little more firm. This texture is firm, but the juiciness is, you see how the spoon is already picking up that juice without even pressing into it? Here, there's juice, but the cells are just much more contained. So let's go ahead and see about spooning it out. And I know this is not how you typically would eat a pomelo. Typically, pomelos are peeled and sectioned off, but we're at home at my house, so we're going to do it this way. Okay, but there you go. Flesh looks good. I'm not going to taste it quite yet. I want to save tasting it for the camera. But here we're going to go ahead and see what the section is on this Oro Blanco. And you can see the juice like jumping out of there. Some of that juice may have even hit the camera. Oh, but you see how that is? Nice and juicy. These are going to be two delicious fruits, I can already tell. So, let's go ahead and try these wonderful fruits. We have our pomelo and we have our Oro Blanco. If we give a little bit more in the comparison before digging in, you can see that the rind of the Oro Blanco is a little bit thinner than the rind on the pomelo. This may be a 1/2 inch on the Oro Blanco. On the pomelo, we're looking at 3/4 of an inch, almost an inch, whereas this is closer to 1/2 an inch. My mouth is already watering. Maybe the pomelo first. Yuan Dan, Kai Le. Happy New Year. Oh wow, that's really good. It's firm, but it's really sweet. And I had it in the refrigerator. It's really sweet and really refreshing. It literally tastes like somebody poured sugar on it. It tastes like somebody took a grapefruit. That's so good. It's like somebody took a grapefruit and poured sugar on it. Like a whole tablespoon of sugar on a grapefruit. It's really good. It's really, really good. I thought it would be underripe and tough, but it's really good. Now let's try the Oro Blanco. You ready? I already sectioned that out. Also very sweet. And juicy. This Oro Blanco retains a little bit more of the bitterness of a grapefruit than the pomelo does. The pomelo is just straight up sweet, and the bitterness or the acidity of the grapefruit is still there in both of them. But this contains slightly more of the grapefruit's bitterness, the Oro Blanco does, than the pomelo does. Okay, I'm gonna try this Oro Blanco again. Another piece. Again, it's really good. I'm so glad I'm growing this on a tree because it is outstanding. It's almost seedless. There's some little baby seeds, but I don't really see any seeds. There might be a seed hidden in there. But both of these are really good. And this one also tastes like It tastes like somebody took a grapefruit and sweetened it. It's actually better tasting to me than a ruby red or a real red. It tastes better than any grapefruit, more palatable than any grapefruit I've ever tasted, considering this is a grapefruit, whereas this is a pomelo. And just now I got a part of the membrane. And right there, on that Oro Blanco, the membrane does have some grapefruit bitterness, but it's cut down maybe a tenth of the bitterness that you would have in a grapefruit. I would never take the membrane of a grapefruit, a ruby red or real red, and just eat it like that. Now, I've never tried on a real red to take the membrane, but I can say for certain on a ruby red grapefruit, or any other store-bought variety of grapefruit, Texas Star, they sell around here, I wouldn't take the membrane and eat it like that. But then this pomelo, it is reminiscent of a grapefruit, but all that bitterness is gone. And now, funny thing, this pomelo grapefruit, this is what they call a white pomelo, or at least that's what they sell the tree as at the nurseries near here in Texas. The white pomelo is the granddaddy of all store-bought grapefruits that you buy. The story is, pomelos are a naturally occurring grapefruit or variety of citrus that looks like a grapefruit. And all cultivated citrus grapefruit varieties are descendants from pollinating a pomelo with a mandarin or another type of native citrus. So the grapefruits that you have in the store, I think it was probably if I have my history right, I believe in the 1800s was when they cross-pollinated the pomelo. And let's double check in the comments below. The pomelo crossed with the mandarin in a hybridized form, and the offspring was the grapefruit. To get to the Oro Blanco and other sweet new varieties of grapefruit were then crossed back to taking a grapefruit and crossing it back to a pomelo and having another hybrid. Now that is a very simplified version of the story, because there are many, many varieties of grapefruits and there are many varieties of pomelos. So depending on which pomelo crossed with which type of mandarin will yield you a different type of grapefruit. And then which type of grapefruit was crossed back to the pomelo to give you the Oro Blanco grapefruit. You've got genetics and you've got a lot of hybridizing going on. But the long story short is the Oro Blanco is sweeter than most store-bought grapefruits because it is crossed back to the pomelo, which again, as I said a minute ago, the pomelo is the granddaddy of all grapefruits, or the grandmother of all grapefruits. But it's sweet. The sweetness of this pomelo, I'm going to take another bite out of it. The pomelo is a little bit less sweet than, say, a navel orange. It doesn't taste like a navel orange. It tastes like a grapefruit, but if you were to take all of the sugar in a grapefruit and multiply that by 10, so you have a sweet fruit It's like an orange. It's considered a sweet fruit when you taste it. It has the sweetness of an orange, but the flavor of a grapefruit. And the sourness or the bitterness is way less than a grapefruit. The bitterness or the sourness would be along the lines of a tangerine, which tangerines have a little bit of that tartness to them. But this is not bitter per se, this pomelo. It is a sweet fruit with a tart bitterness, but it is not a bitter fruit at all. Now I want to try the membrane. The membrane on the pomelo is bitter, very much like a grapefruit, and it's super thick and hard to chew. Whereas the membrane on the Oro Blanco grapefruit, yeah, it was thicker than an orange, thicker than a mandarin, thicker than a navel orange. The membrane is, but it's not hard to chew. The membrane is certainly more bitter than an orange, but the membrane is not nearly as bitter as a grapefruit. And I would even say the membrane on the Oro Blanco is not even as bitter as the membrane on the pomelo. So here you have on the Oro Blanco a really interesting fruit that you could almost eat out of hand. You could almost peel this just like an orange and eat it. Now, the membrane is a little bit thicker and a little bit more bitter than an orange. So I wouldn't necessarily do it, or if I did it, I might eat like half of a membrane if I were to peel it. But it's a rather a good fruit, and these two complement one another very well. What's funny is, unless you are a connoisseur of pomelos, connoisseur of Oro Blanco grapefruit, or a connoisseur of other grapefruits in general, if I were served the flesh of the Oro Blanco without the membrane, just the flesh, if I were at a hotel and ordered whatever grapefruit they had on the menu and it came out the flesh only, I don't know if I would know the difference between it and the white pomelo. If it were on a menu and it came out flesh only with no membrane, sitting here, I can taste the difference. They're both sweet, but the pomelo has more sugar in it. I can taste that. But if I were in a restaurant or at a hotel, room service or something, and I ordered it and it just came up as the flesh only, I don't know if I could tell the difference. I will tell you, the flesh of this Oro Blanco, the one that I am eating right now, is more bitter than the flesh of the pomelo. But the membrane of the Oro Blanco is not as bitter as the membrane of the pomelo. And the membrane of the Oro Blanco is thinner and easier to chew and swallow than the membrane of the pomelo. So all in all, if I were to choose one over the other, it would be a very difficult choice to make because they're both so good. But if I were going to eat it sectioned like this with a spoon, And this is a grapefruit spoon with the serrated edges, which make it easy to get into it. I would choose a pomelo. It's very juicy. The flesh is firm, but it's sweet. Great. It tastes like the best grapefruit you've ever had on the best day, and then added some sugar on it or some honey on it. It's really good. This Oro Blanco here, also very good, delicious. But just comparing these two and eating them the way that I'm eating them, sectioned in halves as you would eat a grapefruit, pomelo's better. However, if for some reason I were out foraging and I just picked from the tree, I would go with the Oro Blanco because you can eat it fresh out of hand. You don't need a spoon. You could just peel it like an orange and eat it like an orange, and it would be delicious and refreshing. You wouldn't have to hassle with peeling it the right way and sectioning it off and separating the flesh from the membrane. This guy here, you could just eat it like an orange and basically have a really good grapefruit that you can eat like an orange. I mean, it's really good. And it also tastes way sweeter than most grapefruits. Now, one grapefruit that I don't have right now is my real red. And I haven't had a real red grapefruit in quite a while because that was one of my trees that was killed in the February 2021 freeze. The one that had grapefruits on it. As I said at the beginning of the video, I dug up a lot of my citrus and put them in containers prior to that freeze because I think it was in November of 2020, before the really bad February of 2021 freeze. A few months before that, at the end of fall, before winter really set in, we had an unseasonal freeze. And a lot of the citrus that were like questionable, I went on and dug them up. If they were in the ground, I dug them up. So this guy was in the ground. I dug it up. This guy was in a pot. This guy's lived in a pot for several years. I think I had it in the ground 4 years ago. But the siding of where it was in the yard with the sun and everything, it wasn't doing well. So I put it in a pot with intentions of planting it in another section of the yard. And I moved it to that area of the yard, as you would often do with a plant that you're planning on planting. You set the pot in the area where you want to plant it. But for some reason or another, it just sat there in the pot for a couple of years. So when November of 2020 came and there was an unseasonal freeze, a lot of those citrus went into my garage. The citrus, this pomelo, I had a couple of other pomelos. I have real red grapefruit, the Oro Blanco grapefruit, a bunch of other citrus, caracara navel oranges, satsumas, several satsumas, blood oranges, just a lot of different things, mandarins, that all went into my yard, went into my garage. But my real red grapefruit that had fruit on it stayed in the yard because it had been in the ground for at least 4 years. And I was concerned with damaging the roots. So I protected it outdoors in November of 2020, and it had grapefruits hanging there and did fine. But I went out of town in February of 2021, Around Valentine's Day is when the freeze hit and I was out of town. The forecast said it was going to be cold, but it did not, at least when I booked my tickets and left town, did not indicate that it was going to be in the single digits, 9, 10, 11, 12 degrees in this area. I believe the closest weather station put us at 10, 11, 12, but there was another weather station nearby that had 9 degrees. So that's cold. There are not many citrus that can take that type of cold. And my Rio Red grapefruit that I loved, and my Meyer lemon that I loved, it's not my only lemon. I have more than one lemon, thankfully. Several of them were also in pots. But the Meyer lemon that I loved the most, and my Rio Red grapefruit, died. The Meyer lemon tree and the Rio Red grapefruit tree died. However, when I got back to town, I pulled the fruit from the Rio Red grapefruit, and they had some cold damage, but they weren't ruined yet. The way that citrus goes is when you have a freeze under 25 degrees, under 20 degrees, the fruit will be killed by the freeze if it's under 20 or 25, depending on the type of citrus you have. Well, of course, at 12 degrees and 10 degrees, it was below that temperature. When I got back to town, which all flights were delayed coming back to town, so I was gone longer than I anticipated. When I got back to town, I pulled the fruit from the tree, hoping to save energy from the tree. So I pulled the fruit and I ate them. They were delicious. Long story short is I don't have them here to taste along with these guys, the Rio Red. But I recall the Rio Red grapefruit was sweeter than the Ruby Red, which Ruby Red is the one that you see marketed in stores with the Ruby Red grapefruit juice. The Rio Red was sweeter. But I don't know about the membrane. If the membrane was quite like this Oro Blanco. And when I say the Rio Red was sweeter, I'm saying the Rio Red was sweeter than the Ruby Red and the Texas Star and those other varieties that you can buy in grocery stores around here. Don't talk with your mouth full. I'm not talking with my mouth full, but I do want you to experience with me tasting these wonderful fruit. And they are good. Well, I'm going to finish eating these off screen. I'm going to probably share with Rebecca or someone. Please like, subscribe to my channel. Share this video with a friend. Leave a comment. Tell me if there's something else you'd like to see me try on my channel. And I do have other fruits that I can try, so let me know what you'd like to see me try. Until then, happy, healthy gardening to you. Bye now.